Okay, so we are live. Should be working. Um, we're streaming earlier today because I want to see if this is a better time for everyone. I think that it should be, considering that, you know, I'm at the earliest, unless you live in Hawaii, I think that I'm at the earliest time for anyone to tune into the stream because I'm on Pacific time. So for those uh, who like to follow this work, who are on, the East Coast or the Midwest, I'm trying to change the time of the stream to make it a bit easier. So I will be starting streaming same days, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but it will be uh, at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for now, and maybe we even lower it to 6 at some point. But I think that that's probably going to be the earliest that we can go, just because of my job. But in other news, I do have an interview set for this Thursday before our discussion on the Discord. So we might start the Discord around 7:30 because this discussion will start at around, and I'll publish the details of it tomorrow. But it will start at 5:30. So that's gonna be like, 2 hours. I figure is plenty of time. I'd imagine, and that's gonna leave us at around 7:30 p.m. to start the Discord discussion, the open call, which those are still great and going strong. If you want the link to my Discord, just let me know via private message on Instagram, either my personal Instagram or Theory of Everyone, and I will send it to you. Trying not to keep it too open. I have noticed that when I post it here, I get people who are not well suited for that group sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying people can't change, but I am saying that, um, it's good to have a group in which people seek it out more. So if people are more willing to message me on Instagram or the Discord link, I figure they're more likely to be personally dedicated in their pursuits instead of just seeing something online and reacting. So 6:30 p.m. Works well. Awesome, very cool. But so we'll keep it at that for now. We might change it, like I said, to 6, but way too many chords. But we will not get it any earlier than 6 p.m. either. That's going to be the earliest that it's going to be. Mayash, my dog's here. She's going to start being here for the stream, so if I have to tell her to be quiet or if you hear a dog barking, I apologize. But we have to start training again a little bit, which means she has to be like next to me, and so that I can like correct her. But maybe she'll jump on here at some point, but it's kind of like a tight space, and she's like a Belgian Malinois, and that's kind of like a lot to deal with. It's like, imagine a 60-pound spring with fur and teeth. You have a Belgian Malinois. So I quit Instagram. I don't blame you. I think that the platforms are getting increasingly difficult to deal with. I have noticed I am totally being suppressed on Instagram on my personal account, not my Theory of Everyone account that I know of, but my personal one. And they did warn me about it because I shared a joke a while back, and it was like about the pandemic, and they were like, "This is an unfactual information." It was a joke, and they were like, "We're limiting your account." So the reach of your account, and I don't know when that expires, if that expires, but if I tag myself in anything that I post, even if it's on Theory of Everyone, it will limit its reach if Tyler, Goldstein is tagged, which is just insane. But it's incredibly frustrating. I'm also dealing with it on here. I definitely know my YouTube's being suppressed, but I don't want to focus on it. It's not, you fuel things by focusing on them, so I'm not going to. But the platforms are absolutely out of control. I have no idea who they're hiring. Kind of blows my mind sometimes how out of touch they really are. I think that it's not even just out of touch. I do think that they're, in physics, there are the quarks, which are, the fundamental particles, supposedly, and they combine to form hadrons. But the quarks consist of 3 masculine and 3 feminine quarks, and they describe perspectives, and you have top and or up and down, and top or truth, and then bottom or beauty, and then you have in the center you have the charm quarks and the strange quarks. And I do think that they are just focusing on what's strange to draw people's eyes on these platforms, and they're not, that means like not posting things that are normal. It means posting things that are strange. And I mean, it's the only justification that I have for this. But strangeness is I would say, like, it is a perspective that is fundamental. It just means different. But I don't know. Whatever their tactics are, I see what they are. That's what their tactics are. But I want to talk today about something else, which is how constraints lead to freedoms. And I think that this is a very important idea to understand in physics, and it's a very, very important idea to understand in science, and it's a very important idea to understand in our lives. And I've touched on it before, but we're going to go more in depth today. I will also say I'm going to try and keep these streams to 2 hours because I need some time to work on the project outside of the streams, and if they're all ending at close to midnight, it's just too much. So I will try and keep these to 2 hours. It's also, I think, more fair to the viewers. I think I was honestly pumping out too much content, I think. And here's the thing about constraints and freedoms is I was getting stuck sometimes on what to talk about. And it's not like I've run out of ideas. It's just that when you have an open-ended limit, which is a non-limit, okay, then, and you're pumping out so much all the time, it really constrains you because you can't change your thought process, and it constrains also your viewers because they can't tune into your content and still have a life, which isn't good, because you guys should spend less time on my content than I spend, considerably. And so I think that I was just pumping out too much content. When I first started this, I wanted to do 2 streams a day, live streams every day, simultaneous YouTube and Instagram in the mornings. And this was because I was a contractor and didn't have a full-time job. And also in the evenings. And I realized within like a week this was unsustainable. And then as time went on, realized that every day other than Fridays was also unsustainable. And I needed to reduce it. But I think I'm going to reduce it even more now, not because so much it's unsustainable for me. It has reached the sustainable point for me as far as energy goes. I love interacting with you guys and talking on here live. It fuels me. It's not something that I dread. I mean, when I very first started this project, I was just going to put out a video or 2 a week, and it wasn't going to be live, and that drained me. I don't like to edit videos very much. Sometimes once it's done, then you're like, that's cool. But other than that, it's just draining. I don't get the feedback, and it's not, it doesn't help me. But the whole reason why I can be so consistent is because of you guys. And I mean that, not doing it for the likes or the follows. We're almost at 400 followers though, and I hope we can get it to 400 followers by the end of the week. But but it's not for the followers, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't do live streams that are so long. But we're going to keep them to 2 hours, and we're going to try and end every single one of them by 8:30 if we start at 6:30, and we're only doing Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I'm not going to ever constrain those Discord discussions because I like the open-endedness of it, but here it was constraining. I've realized the length. It was constraining of the viewers, of people who wanted to watch it. And I know this from other content that I followed with people. When they have very long content and they're streaming almost every day or multiple times a week, you keep up with it when you can, and then all of a sudden your life changes and you can't. And I don't want this to be like, if you fell off, you're done, and like you can't get back into it because it's just every stream is 3.5 hours and it's just pumping out tons of content. And plus, it just doesn't work with making clips either. It's just too much. So I'm lowering it. But this is what I mean by constraints can lead to freedoms, is I don't really have freedoms to have people make clips right now because it's not able to be watched consistently because it's too long. And I also don't have the freedom to make my own clips because it's too long. And I also, subscribe to Theory of Every0ne Clips channel run by Ethan, who's a member of this community. He's done a great job with it. He's doing a great job with it. And he's not the only person that I'm doing this for, but I did sit back and realize, like, I was talking to someone else who's even another member of the community about just like, what is too much content to keep up with. And he was, it was a very valuable discussion, but I had realized like this was something I needed to reflect on, and I'm going to give this a shot of just like slowing it down a bit. And it's not good for also new people, because if they want to come in here and they want to join, then, perceive this content and understand the content, if they're coming in and you're just clicking on a 3-hour video of some guy you've never heard of, that's probably like unlikely to lead to much understanding or value. So, that's another reason why I'm doing this, is because it's not only freeing for me, because now I can work on my paper outside of this and afterwards, and I also have more time with my wife. It's more freedom for you guys because you have more time, and it's easier for you to jump in and understand and keep up with content and all kinds of stuff, and new people to join. So this is just like a good example of how freedoms can lead to constraints, and I wanted to like lead with that as it relates to the show, or as it relates to the live streams, just because it's found everywhere. And we're going to talk about it in physics too, and why people they're really having a hard time building a coherent universe and a coherent worldview. So that physicists build universes, or try to, when they are trying to work on theories of everything, and people build worldviews in order to understand what's going on around them. And it must be that you start from constraints, because you can't actually, I don't think, even start with a freedom, because if you start with a freedom, it doesn't necessarily lead to constraints. Because let's say the freedom is that you can stream, as much as you want. And that's the freedom. And you start there. It's like, okay, we'll build from that. You literally can't. There's no schedule that starts to be built from that. But if you're like, okay, you can only stream after work, which ends at 5. Okay? Now you have hours of which, you can start building, your streams. And then let's add in another constraint of you can only stream for 2 hours. It's like, okay, well, now I can only stream for 2 hours, and I now have to find a time after 5, but that allows for a stream that is up to 2 hours, and this helps you like pinpoint what you need to focus on. And you can't do that if you just leave it open. This is like when people are like, and here's an example in your daily life. It's like when people want food, your wife, your girlfriend wants food, especially. And they're like, oh, well, I'm hungry. It's like, okay, well, what do you want? Anything. Anything. Okay. That isn't helpful. It always ends up being like, okay, well, I don't know what to do because I'm paralyzed now because it could go anywhere. But if you're like, anything except fast food, Mexican food, Italian food, or Japanese food, it's like, okay, well, now we're working with like Thai, Cuban food, and American. And think about the places near you or something. And it just helps you start building, helps you start narrowing down where you need to focus, what you need to look at, what you can do from that place. And you cannot start with a freedom of like, oh, anything. You can stream as long as you want. You can stream whenever you want. It's like, well, let's try and deduce when we can stream from, yeah, my schedule's completely open. You can't do it. And you need a constraint, which is like, oh, it's better here because of this. I can't do it here because of that. And forwards or building is the only freedom that you have, is to build. And so you must start building from a place that, makes sense with your current world. And that has to start from a constraint. This is also true of physics. And this is how I did all of this. And, Eric Weinstein talks about this too. He said that it's not so much that, God is all powerful. That's like the best thing to focus on insofar as physics goes. It's that God is all constrained. And what ends up happening is that God is emergently all powerful, but also when you're trying to understand God, you can't do it unless you start from all constrained. I'm going to explain why, because you literally cannot form a universe without that. So, Christy, correct information overload can be a hurdle for some. Yes, absolutely. I've noticed a lot of the larger channels do about 2 to 6 short videos a day. Those will either be clips of a stream, rant, or breaking news. Then at some point they do a long live stream. They usually delete the live stream in its full version. Yeah, I don't think we're going to do that, but where we delete the live stream in its full version, because I think that it's... But, you never know. I don't know. We'll see. But here, let's look at some clips that I want to talk about. But this is a very important concept, and it really does... we're so hesitant to put limits on ourselves if we have the choice. And it's really important to put limits on yourself. And that goes for everything that you do. Maya, my dog. Okay. Let's see here. Maya, no, it's okay. Shh. We're gonna see how this goes. we might have to like get rid of the dog during the streams, but I think we can just get her to be like you know, better behaved. Okay, this might be a good clip. Gosh, I will get faster internet too. That's another thing that we're going to get. And eventually, also a faster computer than the MacBook Air. It sucks though, because the Mac, I've talked about this before, but I will say this, the constraints of a MacBook and Mac like computers is not good actually. But that's because, or MacBook Pro at least, because you can't switch or change anything, is not good. You can't do any work on it, which makes it not a pro. Interesting. It's like even it looks like some things with Eric are being suppressed on YouTube. It's very weird.
And Eric, I'll put in this, or yeah, go ahead. I don't really know whether it is wireless AI and or AGI. It's a particular. I'm Tony. I'm going to augment my emergence, which learn about the no-go theorems, all of the things that.
Let's see here.
Series. I am looking forward to hosting Steve and getting into the thick of his theory and how it works. I think that one of the things that people should.
This is a great interview, by the way. This one right here that I highly suggest you check out. This is with it's on Brian Keating's YouTube channel, and it's let's see.
Being very enthusiastic about what we're doing.
I do closed captions.
I'd be interested to hear from somebody credible who says, I mean, you've said, I don't believe your theory, so you're... Wait a second. No, I believe that your theory is either going to reproduce. If they're both right, then they would have to be fit together. Most probably, of course, they're both wrong, because then we have to see.
Huh.
Kind of to understand it, and I still think these guys are talking crap. I think Steven's exactly right. The coincidence of his, if they're both right, then they would have to be fit together. Most helplessness that comes out of the no-go theorems, pessimism that came out of the LHC. I disagree with Steven. I still think that there is a core community.
So in this video, though, I need to find it, but he is discussing God, and he said, and to the issue of atheism, this was the quote, it's more important to focus on a being that is not necessarily all powerful, but all constrained. Or he said it's more important to focus on a being all constrained than all powerful. And the reason why he's saying this, I'm pretty sure, is because what he sees is that you start building from a constraint. And not only that, but you can see that the universe, in the way that its laws emerge and unfold, are extremely constrained. At least it appears that way. I will say that it does appear that way. It might not be that way, but if it's not that way, then the decisions that are being made to have that universe occur the way that it does, it's not. It's it's like it's not occurring even in a space in proto space time or beyond the universe that we can even fathom. It's really like just a total place of total decision and choice, which I can't really imagine that existing without constraints. You need constraints to have choices. Like imagine if I'm like, if you have to make a choice and you have to choose between A and B, now you have a choice. But imagine you have to make a choice. And that's it. And it's like, okay, well, a choice between what? Anything. Choice between a choice of anything? That doesn't really make sense. It's almost like that. What is the answer? So like this thing. This is a great, actually, I should have led with this, but this is great.
Many millions of years ago, a race of hyper-intelligent, pan-dimensional beings got so fed up with the constant bickering about the meaning of life that they commissioned two of their brightest and best to design and build a stupendous supercomputer to calculate the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
Oh, deep thought. We want you to tell us the answer.
The answer to what?
The answer to life, the universe, everything. We'd really like an answer. Something simple.
I have to think about that. Return to this place in exactly 7.5 million years.
Is it finished? Oh, there's more. There's more. They go back 7.5 million years later.
That's right. They do.
Deep thought. Do you have
An answer for you? Yes, but you're not going to like it.
doesn't matter. We must know it.
All right. The answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is 42. Yes, I thought it over quite thoroughly. It is, it's 42. It would have been simpler, of course, to have known what the actual question was.
But it was the question. The ultimate question. Of everything.
That's not a question. Only when you know the question will you know what the answer means.
Give us the ultimate question.
I can't. But there is one who can. A computer that will calculate the ultimate question. A computer of such infinite complexity that life itself will form part of its operational matrix. And you yourselves shall take on new, more primitive forms and go down into the computer to navigate its 10 million year program. I shall design this computer for you, and it shall be called
Earth. That's what the computer ends up being called, Earth. And so this is from the movie Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which obviously was a film created based on a book that has a total cult following around it. It's basically like an atheist's Bible. If you are familiar with the crowd in Silicon Valley, they do treat this like it is a holy text. And there's lots of things about it that did emerge that are pretty amazing. One of them is that the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42. And I would actually argue that that's correct. But, that's due to a lot of understanding. It's not just that it's just, how is the answer 42? But I looked up once how the author of that book decided on the number 42. And he said he just tried to think of the funniest number. And I don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but we have to take him at his word. And it is pretty funny. I will give him that. But in my work, it seems to symbolize wisdom and awareness and recognition and grace and all kinds of very specific things that sounds not so specific, but it's very specific due to where it pops up and the type of values that lead to it and things like that, the constructs that lead to it. But I discussed last night on my Instagram stream, which I'm still streaming every Monday at some point on Instagram. I haven't decided on the time yet, but it's going to be usually later. It's after 8 at least. Sometimes it's after 9. But I will let people into the live chat. And last night I discussed the first question that you have to ask. So what is the ultimate question? And I would actually argue that there is an ultimate question, but that doesn't mean that it's starting from this place of not being constrained. It is starting from a place of extraordinary constraint. And it has a lot to do with how I started this work. And so let's take a look. So if we're going to look at the ultimate question, then you have to first think about the ultimate constraint. What would the ultimate constraint be? And just go here, wrap text. The ultimate question is this. That's it. Maya, stop. Sorry. My dog has allergies. She's licking her paws. Okay, so the ultimate question is this. This is the ultimate question. And the reason why it's the ultimate question is that it answers itself. Okay? And it is the first question that you can ask about anything. And what I mean by it answers itself is, what is the first question? The answer is, what is the first question? Okay? And the constraint that you start from is that it must be the first question. Okay? And that sounds like odd and maybe not so obvious about what I'm trying to say, but what I mean is that this process of questioning has to go in a specific order. And what you're trying to arrive at is a place where you form a base to build from, okay? And that starts from the most free that you can be is still extraordinarily constrained by the fact that you need to ask questions in a sequence. So if you're asking a question, it is for a specific purpose. And if it's for a specific purpose, then there must be something that follows that question. It can't just be like a question on its own. There's nothing else. There's a reason for it. And that means that it happens in a sequence. First, second, third, fourth, etc. And so, but when you ask, what is the first question? The answer ends up inevitably being, what is the first question? Because it answers itself. Does that make sense? So I disagree with this supercomputer deep thought. I think deep thought should have thought a little bit more deeply in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because there is an ultimate question. And it's a question that answers itself. And what's fascinating is that when you think about a consciousness, okay, a consciousness is very similar to a question that answers itself. It is a self-referencing loop of information. You are self-aware. That's what makes you conscious. That means that you are informing of yourself. So you are the informer, the informed, and the information. And that is this loop of information that happens. So basically, it's just like every single consciousness is in some way all three of these things, where it's the informer, the information, and the informed. Especially if you're God, because there's nothing else but you. So you have to be all three of these things. It's like being, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit all at once. You have to be the informer, the information, and the informed. So you could be like parent, logos, which is logos spermaticos, which is the generative pattern of existence, essentially, which is it's just fractal pattern. Everything comes from itself. And then child. That means that this one, child, has to line up with this one, parent, in some way. It has to be a reflection of, made in the image of, across via this information right here. But if you are existence itself, then you have to also be the experiencer, the experience, and the it's like I guess you could just do this. Observer. Observed. And the observation. Basically. That's easier. So this is that triality that you see in quantum mechanics as well. It's just everywhere. Space-time, past, present, future, all kinds of things. But this one is now question 2, answer 1. Okay, and next, it's going to be, so from what is the first question, it answers with what is the first question. And then you go to what is the truest thing that I know. Okay. This one would be question 3, answer 2. And then from there, because you have to ask yourself, like, so you go from what is the first question to what is the first question to what is the truest thing that I know. And it's almost like these two exist outside of anything else. Everything else is generative, and these two are intrinsic. And is a good way to put it. So, but you have, in order to build, so whenever you're going to answer a question or ask a question, it's to get an answer that helps you understand. And so in order to have an understanding, you have to have a hierarchy. And in order to have a hierarchy, you have to figure out what is highest in the hierarchy. So what is the truest thing that I know to build from? And then every single time, the inevitable answer will be I am. Because you're the one asking. Okay? So you cannot get rid of these questions. These are the inevitable line of questions. They're all constrained. You can't escape them. Every single question or sequence of questioning has to start from here, starting with this. And from there, you have a constraint to build from. So, and it's not so open-ended. Everything has to be checked through your own experience. That's what that means, because you are the truest thing that you know. And you deduce that question itself, that answer from the question that you deduce from this self-answering question, this looping question. And so it's fascinating. This constraint is the starting process of everything. And what's also interesting is that when you really look at this, you're like, wow, what does that correspond to in mathematics? Well, how about the Fibonacci sequence, which is 1, 1, 2, 3 to start? Because it's always the previous two added. So then the next one would be 5, and then the next one would be 8, and the next one would be 13, and then 21, and 34, and 55, and there you go. And it just keeps going. But what you can see here is that these questions correspond with the starting values of the Fibonacci sequence. Because it's 1, 1. What is the first question? What is the first question? 2, 3. That's not meaningless. It makes perfect sense. And you can't simultaneously say, somebody said in our Discord today, they said, oh, numerology, and, they were like ranting about it and how that's ridiculous. And like, listen, I'm not going to tell you that numerology websites are to be believed. But I will tell you that the idea that numbers do not correspond to questions, answers, phrases, words, thoughts, that's insane. Because everything is, I don't want to say everything is mathematics, but everything within multiplicity is mathematics. And so you can't argue simultaneously that the correspondence between these is nonsense, but also that we live in a universe that is, dictated by the laws of math. That doesn't make sense. Math is underlying of everything within multiplicity, and I would say it's not actually fundamental outside of multiplicity. And we're going to get as to why. I would say that it's just not. I mean, you could, if any field is fundamental, it's philosophy, but I would argue it's not even philosophy, because you'd have to change the definition of the field kind of in a way to get there. It's really just metaphysics. Metaphysics is the fundamental field of study, and that field encompasses everything from questions to numbers and mathematics and physics and everything. So this is an extremely constrained set of questioning now. And it's also an extraordinarily constrained set of sequences, because let's say that you want to show the Fibonacci sequence, okay? So let's go here, where I'm messing with sequences. Here's the Fibonacci numbers. And let's basically say that we'll set this one as equal to 0. Okay? And what's fascinating is that what you see just happened is that everything just moved, but the sequence didn't change. Okay, it's still the Fibonacci sequence: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, etc. So let's set this one to 0. Now we're screwed. We have no growth, we have no sequence, and that's because essentially you've just eliminated a starting block of information. Okay, and so let's undo that. So you have to start from 1. You can't start from 2, because how do you get 2 if you don't start from 1? You can't start from 3, because how do you get 3 without starting from 1? You have to start from 1. This is the ultimate constraint in physics and mathematics and everything, and it dictates how you build an entire universe. People wonder, how did you build that? Through starting with 1. Okay? And if you eliminate that, you get nothing. Even that was a bit wrong, because of my model needs to be adjusted. But you cannot do anything without starting from 1. Like, what is the first question? You can't be like, what is the second question, if you haven't figured out the first question. And the thing is that if you asked that, let's say you asked, what is the second question? Do you realize what you did? You already created and answered the first question. And you're stuck at the same constraint. Do you see? Now, you literally have it such that if this is question 1, but you're asking, what's the second question? It ends up being emergently question 1 if it's the first question that you've asked. And then it's also still self-answering. Okay? Because it's, if you're like, well, what is the second question? It's just, it still ends up being self-answering, because the second question, it's just like how it is in the first, in the over here, where it's like, what is the first question? The answer is, what is the first question? So what is the second question? The answer would be always this, because itself, because you're starting with a question, and it's emergently the first question, which means that the second question has to be the same thing, essentially. So, if that makes any sense, I think that's correct. I mean, this one, I'm diving into like the weeds here a little bit, where I haven't really thought about it as much as I've thought about, what is the first question. But if you guys can think of where that doesn't work, so you would be like, what is the second question? The answer, I think, is, oh no, it doesn't have to be, actually. That's I don't think so, actually. I take that back. But it's still, I guess it's not a self-answering question. But it still ends up being the first question, which means that the second question would be, Q2 would be What is the first question? Maybe it would be this. In which case you literally still didn't escape it. That's fascinating. So if what is the first, question 1 would be, what is the second question? And then question 2 would be, what is the first question? And it would just still be stuck in the loop. So you're still constrained. Yeah. And then the answer would be answer 3. Answer 3. 2. Okay. I think it would still be, what is the first question? What is the first question? Interesting. I was just thinking deeply about it. It still sticks you with this as starting as the constraint. It doesn't even matter. Like, if you try and avoid it. And then you would be like, what is the truest thing that I know? Fascinating. But this is also true of the Fibonacci sequence. And I'll take a look at questions in a minute. But if you're looking at, like, the Fibonacci sequence here, and essentially, let's say we start with 2, and you can see what it does here. It's just like it still repeats. It still is like 2, 2, 4, 6, 10, and it's this is still the Fibonacci sequence, and you can tell because if you look at the ratio, it's still the same. It doesn't change it at all. But it still starts with 2 repeating values. You can't escape it. This one would be this plus this. Yep. Fascinating. But you are starting from the constraint of 1. And I'll get into my model, how this pertains to my model in a minute. But let me look at the chat. I like being able to go back and see the entire live stream. Me too. Funny movie. It is a funny movie. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. I will say that truth is always stranger than fiction. I think fiction must be deduced from the truth, even if we don't think that it is. It's pulling from somewhere, and therefore must be a distillation of the truth, which means it can't be as incredible as the truth. It just can't. It can be more weird, like seemingly more weird, but it's not actually more weird. You can't even deduce the weirdness of the totality of the truth, probably. But you can, distill it and then put it into a strange context and then call it, fiction. But 42 was also a hilarious answer to the question on Family Guy. I didn't see that. Bill Cosby asks Stewie how old he thinks his dad is. 42, that's very funny. Can we branch out from that and ask what is the first statement? I think that the first statement is I am. I think that is the end of the first line of questioning, is the first statement, which is I am. And then you build from there. I guess that's technically correct. What is the next type of correct? Best type of correct. Sorry, that's just a quote reference. What is the first quote? At what point does the high five come into play? I don't know. After or before the low five? It's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question. I recently listened to an episode of Crow 777. I was asked to go on his show a long time ago with the head science guy of the Walter Russell Foundation. Would you be interested in listening to it? Yes, I would. And you can share it in the Discord. Just send it to me via Discord link, and I'll listen to it. But I actually was asked if I would want to go on that guy's show. But I don't know him, but I know people that do, and I said I would, but then everybody just got, sidetracked. So I probably will actually reach out and see, because that would be pretty cool. I'm going on. I'll show you whose podcast I'm going on this weekend. This is Unbearable's Media, and it's was started by Owen Benjamin, and it includes made by Jim Bob, who is a political cartoonist and satirical logician. I would say that's probably an accurate way of illustrating scholar of logic and jewelcraft. That's also accurate. I eventually would like to have him on, and I've talked to him about it, and we were going to do it, but life has been crazy, but I will get around to it eventually. Owen, I will have on eventually too. I want to discuss comedy and its purpose and its constraints and freedoms and everything about it, that the theory of every comedy. That would be a great podcast, but I'm just trying to iron out exactly what I would want to focus on. But eventually I will have him on. But this is podcast I'm going on this Thursday. It's the Pat Life podcast. Resilience, Human Potential, and Gravy, which means fascinating things. And I've seen he does some stuff with quantum mechanics, and he discusses all kinds of things involving the universe and humanity. I am not super familiar with this content, but I've looked at it a bit, and it looks like it's a good match with this work. Be conscious of where you put your energy. That sounds pretty good. Finding your tribe. Overcoming a life of regret. Yeah. Present moment in time. That's like a first single, I guess. That's pretty cool. I'll look at that later. But this is whose podcast I will be on this Thursday. I'm looking forward to it. The Unbearables. Well, it looks like YouTube is considering me pretty unbearable lately, so that's okay. Come on.
Many millions of years ago.
There we go. Slowly. But yeah, this idea of being extremely constrained. My talk is moving the lights, but God is not a good theory. This is a video by Sean Carroll, which I have, called out the unlikelihood of being accurate in a video that I released. But he released this video. It's called God is Not a Good Theory.
Into new insight, people who do believe in necessary beings and so forth have a response to this. They will say, sure, you can imagine that, but they're not really legitimate possibilities for what the world can be like. And that's because there's no explanation fundamentally. There's no reason why the world is like that. That the role of
So
what I'm trying to get at is that if you sat down again a priori and tried to think about all the possible ways that existence could manifest itself, we know that to at least some extent there are mathematical ways of talking about existence, talking about the real world. I can easily imagine self-contained and consistent mathematical structures in which the notion of God or necessary beings or first causes play no role whatsoever.
real.
Now, this is not some brilliant new insight. People who do believe in necessary beings and so forth have a response to this. They will say, sure, you can imagine that, but they're not really legitimate possibilities for what the world can be like. And that's because there's no explanation, fundamentally. There's no reason why the world is like that. That the role of God is to ground why this world rather than some other, or indeed why this world at all, why a world at all. So the response to my examples would be, sure, you can mathematically write those down, but you haven't explained why that would be the universe. And my response to those arguments is, so what? Who is to say that I'm supposed to explain why there is a universe?
Maybe the fact that you're a scientist. Like, maybe that. Maybe that's what, is to say. Like, if your goal, this is the inconsistency of this argument, and it is because it's unconstrained. He has this theory of many worlds, and I hate the theory, but it's not even that I hate the theory. It's just nonsense. And, this is what happens when you are not constrained in how you build, because you refuse to put reason into the equation. And the thing about God is that if you start from God, okay, and God implies two things. Existence is a single consciousness that is self-aware, and there's only one of them, which is implied by the very definition. And this is, it's almost like a question that answers itself. It's implied in the very first question. The traits are implied in the definition. And so you cannot actually make any sense in any other way when you're trying to build the universe other than just rooting yourself in what we see here, which means you end up making all kinds of stupid mistakes like, space-time is fundamental. Four-dimensional space-time is fundamental. No, it's not. No, it's not at all. But you can make even worse mistakes by saying, okay, it's not fundamental, so actually it's 11-dimensional hyperspace. No, it's not. Like, these mistakes are made by avoiding two things. One, the universe must be a self-referencing information structure. And the only self-referencing information structure is a structure that is aware of itself. Okay? That is a constraint. It's a constraint of information. If there's only one existence, and existence references information within existence, then existence is a self-referencing information structure. And the only thing that is a self-referencing information structure is a consciousness, because it's a self-aware structure, which is a being. And so you get to that from, that constraint of just like looking at reality and realizing that it has to be constrained within itself. It is so constrained because it is constrained within itself. And from there, you just build. And you end up at the point of like, there's a purpose to this. There is a meaning to this. Because consciousnesses don't just do things for no reason. They do things for reasons. And if you're not constrained at all, then you'll be like, well, why can't I have this universe? Why can't I have this universe where it's just one particle spinning around 16 particles, or 16 particles spinning around one, and I don't know, whatever else you want to create. Dollhouse universe. I have no idea. And but who is to say which one is more correct and less correct? The thing is that when you constrain yourself to logic, and you constrain the universe to within the universe, and information to within information, and change of that information to change within that information by referencing that its own information. Okay, like the informed, the information, and the informer. You end up with, again, a self-referencing structure, which is a consciousness, and it's a singular one because it's the totality of existence in and of itself. And there's no way around this at all. And I showcase this and I try not to mock people. I'm not proud of everything that I've said about Sean Carroll, but this one is not one that I regret. But it's not about Sean Carroll, it's about his argument, and that's the difference. So if we go to Theory of Every0ne, and you look right here, it's interesting because Sean Carroll made this lecture, God is not a good theory, and it's famous in physics. And it's also not a theory that builds, and I've discussed this before, is like you have to have an alternative. You can't just be like, it's not a good theory. Well, why? What is a good theory? You can't be like, well, the burden isn't on me to show what is a good theory. I can just tell you that yours is not. No, the burden is on you to say what is a good theory if you're going to tell me that mine is not. You can't just be like, oh, well, why do I have to explain it? Then you don't have to explain anything and you shouldn't be a scientist. That's what my response is to that. Like, let's take it outside of the logical arguments and just like recognize that you have no business in this space. Maya, shh. It's okay. Hey. So. And we're back. This is a very old video.
If you did believe that God was a necessary being, that you literally could not imagine a universe in which God did not play an important role, in order logically for me to refute that belief, all I need to do is to invent a universe in which God does not exist.
Invent a universe in which God does not exist.
So according to Sean Carroll, all we have to do in order to show that a conscious creator is not necessary to the existence of a universe is consciously create a universe. Does anybody else see the problem with this? And it really is that easy. And by the way, he blocked me on all platforms because of that. All platforms. That's insane. Don't block people on all platforms for that. I don't harass Sean Carroll. Never harassed Sean Carroll. I've literally tagged him. I didn't even tag him. I responded to him one time on Twitter and it got me blocked. I tagged him once on Instagram and it got me blocked. And you can't really do that on YouTube, but I'm sure if he could block me on YouTube, he would. And that's not good. Like, if you're harassing someone and you're like discrediting all their work or something like that, then that's not, I understand wanting to avoid speaking with them, like Eric Weinstein and like this whole debacle of like, that whole situation that I'm not going to get into. But I will say, not proud of how either side has behaved. But, trolling has its limits. Like, you want to troll an argument, that's fine. Don't troll a person. But I like I said, there was a moment where I was like saying in these old videos of, Sean Carroll isn't an inspiration to me anymore. That's not true. Like, he's not an inspiration necessarily, but he's kind of is. He goes and speaks to people and teaches people physics, and But he said on Joe Rogan once, philosophers had a lot of potential in physics, and I was like, it was inspiring to me to hear it, and then to see his dismissal of an idea so, I guess, like with such hostility, the idea of God, as to block me, everywhere, is kind of insane. And it's not inspiring, but that's fine. I don't need Sean Carroll to inspire me. But I will say, he does have a great channel that I learned a lot from, and it's his Biggest Ideas in the Universe YouTube channel, and I think it's great. I highly recommend checking it out. It was very integral to me in my beginning in physics. So you got to give people their due. Everybody has meaning, and just dismissing people isn't good. But to make an entire like lecture called "God is not a good theory." It doesn't matter whether or not God is real or not. You are being counterproductive. Okay? Because entropy is a thing, and you're not building. You're just destroying. This is why I say you have to have a counter theory if you want to be a constructive scientist or a constructive thinker. If you want to be a destructive thinker, then you can just make lectures that, say God is not a good theory. And so I made a video called God is a Good Theory, and I kind of started to explain why. I don't know how coherent it was, but we'll do another one. But it's been over a year, so I'm sure we could make one much, much better. But it won't be probably a stream. It'll be like probably an more produced video like my first one. And it's probably going to start with the exact same clip because it's just too good. But you can't just start with a negative. And this is exactly was my critique of Tim Nguyen's paper, critiquing Eric Weinstein's geometric unity. It just started with, the conclusion of the paper was, here's why Eric Weinstein's theory isn't good. It's like, okay. That's not constraining. You have to constrain yourself to, this is good, though. If you're just like, it's not good. Well, why? It doesn't matter. Like, what is good then? Oh, well, don't ask me. I don't have to answer that. So you're not constraining yourself at all. And that means you're giving nobody any answers. Like, anybody that wants to understand physics, if they look and all they had to go off of was your paper, and it just was, here's why God is not true, or here's why geometric unity is not true. This doesn't help anybody know anything. They just know this isn't true. Okay, well, what is true? No, who knows? Like, nothing or everything. Who knows? It doesn't matter. There's no constraints. But if you start from, this is the alternative, though. You're starting from a constraint. You are now forcing yourself to build from specific contexts. And if you can't do that, I don't want to hear, why you think that someone's entire theory is wrong. Maybe, you can critique the math, that's fine, but you didn't dismiss the idea. And that's because of you didn't constrain yourself. You have to add in constraints. This is lazy science to do this, where it's like, well, GU is wrong. Well, what's correct then? I don't know. Well, God isn't a good theory. Okay, well, what is a good theory? I don't know. Burden isn't on me. Why do I have to answer that? Maybe because your goal is to be someone who answers questions. Like, you answered no questions. Like, don't be in science if you're going to do lazy science. This is lazy science, anti-science. It's literally anti-science. It's better than pseudoscience, because pseudoscience means fake science. But if pseudoscience was a thing, this would be pseudoscience. God is not a good theory. Geometric unity is wrong. This is incorrect. Like, you have to do good science, even if you are incorrect, you have to say, this is what I believe. This is the assumption. And you know, when you're looking at how to start thinking, my very first model that I ever made was this. Okay, and right here. And what's very important about this model is it's just a decision tree of how you start to deduce things. And so this wasn't first in there, but I added it later just because I'm working on understanding it a bit more. But start here. I tried to think, how does a general intelligence think? You know, how does a general AI or general, you know, NI, natural intelligence, begin thinking? And think in such a way as that it will apply to every single system that it's placed into. A general intelligence. I can pick you up and drop you in the middle of the ocean and you might not survive, but you will figure out how to maneuver. I can drop you into, you know, Hollywood and you can figure out how to maneuver. I can drop you into the desert and you can figure out how to maneuver. A general intelligence is that. There is no other intelligence other than general intelligence. Our current AI, quote unquote, is not actually intelligence. But it requires that you have no pre-programmed assumptions about a specific environment, which means that you have to have one pre-programmed reaction to every environment, and or an assumption also about every environment. And the only one that is this, where it's basically fight the system. But fight the system doesn't just mean reject your current default status, like here. That's not it. There's 4 steps to it. You first reject the current default status, which is, let's say, you want to understand God, and you don't believe in God. So now, in order to think about this logically, you have to reject your default status, which would be like anti-theism. Okay. Now you're an anti-theist. That doesn't bring you anywhere. But so the second step is you have to assume the opposite of your current default status is true and test against it, which really these are two in the same. I mean, I guess that's a good way of putting it, is that these two are actually the same thing. Rejecting your current default status or fighting the system means assuming the opposite of the default is true. Okay? So you assume that your default observation, let's say the sky is blue and you see it as blue and you want to think about this objectively. You don't say, okay, the sky looks blue, let's look for evidence that it's blue. That will get you nowhere. You can't be like, the sky is blue, looks blue, let's assume that it's not blue and look from there, you know, or let's assume there's no sky or something like that. You have to look for the opposite. So you'd have to say, the sky is red, which is, you know, or green actually is the opposite color of red. So let's just use that as an example. So you'd be like, the sky is green. And then you look for evidence that the sky is green. You don't just say, the sky is not blue. Okay, so what is it? You can't start from there. You have to constrain yourself, which means you have to make an assumption. If you don't make an assumption, you don't constrain yourself. If you don't constrain yourself, you can't build logically. If you can't build, then you aren't moving. There's only staticness, and in our constraints of relativity, you can experience entropy, and because of time, and therefore we can only operate in, you have to build or you have to die. Okay, or decay, build or decay. And if all you're doing is this, where you're like,
my response to those arguments is, so what?
so
Who
what?
is to say that I'm supposed to explain why there is a universe? You might prefer
Do you realize he's a physicist? He's a physicist. Why does he abandon his entire worldview and goals and you know, occupation and dream and you know, everything he works for? And at that, it's like, okay, so as soon as you have to explain why there would be a reason or why there wouldn't be, it's no longer within your purview as a cosmologist to explain the cosmos. We don't need you for anything else. That's your job. Like, you know, that's supposed to be his job, but he abandons it. And it's so nonsensical. And the reason why is because there is no sensible way forward without constraining yourself. So, you know, I do admire that he came up with or is working on many worlds, even though I think it's nonsense. And it's basically the elimination of reason. He's like, well, if there's... I'm just going to explain away reason. Everything happens, so nothing happens for a reason because everything happens. That's wrong. And it goes against the fundamental rules and constraints of logic itself. And you can't... But see, it makes people abandon that. Like Sean Carroll and everybody else that believes in many worlds. And it sucks. It's like they're fish in the desert at that point. They're chickens with their heads cut off because there is no constraint. You know, everyone starts as a chicken with their head cut off. And imagine you're a chicken with its head cut off and you're in a room and you need to move somewhere. And there's nothing in the room. There's nothing to touch. You're just spinning around in circles like all over the place. You're not moving in any direction. But now if you put the chicken in a room where the walls are just right there to the sides of it, and also there's another wall behind it, and it's just like moving in one direction. It's like, well, now the chicken has no choice but to go one direction, even if it has no head. It just, you know, it will, let's assume that even a headless chicken can realize that it can't move to these two sides, and also can't move backwards and is being pushed forward, so therefore, that's the way. Like, you need to constrain yourself to free yourself from yourself. And you can only do this by making a positive assertion. Because everything else doesn't build any kind of construct. And you have to build. But a construct is constraining. That's what a construct is. And that's kind of like the perfect way to highlight that issue is like, how do you build a construct that's not constrained? You can't. So, but you'll see this with people who are trying with their everything in their being to just reject the idea that there is any constraints when those constraints involve sentience. But you have to realize that sentience is the primary statement or assertion that you have to build from, is the existence of sentience, because you are sentient. So the first question, what is the first question? Then what is the first question? Then what is the truest thing that I know? Then I am, because I am the questioner. So everything around me, and the observer, and the experiencer, and the interpreter, and that means that you and the fundamental aspects of you are the truest thing that you know about the universe. So what's the truest thing that you know about the universe? You are, which means self-awareness and sentience are the truest aspects of the universe that you know. But we have a scientific narrative right now that is assuming that non-sentience and a lack of awareness is the intrinsic fundamental nature of existence. And that means that they have abandoned themselves as the constraint by which to build their world. And that's not good. There's a reason why first-hand information is prioritized above second-hand information, but we have removed people from the environment in which they can realize that. We put them into schools for 10 hours a day, and we tell them everything under the sun. And we don't allow them to have experiences that lead to consequences in their feelings. And I don't mean like emotions alone. I also mean like physical feelings, where you can get hurt and it will solidify an experience to you to where that moment now trumps anything anyone can tell you. If you grab a pot on the stove and it burns you, no one can tell you that pots on the stove will never be hot or are cold. You know, like you will never believe them because you had an experience that now is intrinsic to you. But you have to get burned. And that's the constraint, is you have to experience things firsthand. Firsthand. First question. Starting from oneness of existence. There's only one existence. These are the constraints. And the constraints, these are the contextualized constraint of oneness. That oneness is the constraint that builds everything else. And it's interesting because in the Fibonacci sequence, if you put 0 before, you know, at one of the ones, it just shifts down the sequence entirely, like I showed you. And if you look at a 0, it's just a loop that's closed. Okay? And it's a loop of information that's self-referencing of itself and just goes around like this. And it's quantized, which means that there's nothing outside it. It is referencing of itself and it has intrinsic oneness. This is not a coincidence that's meaningless either. And I know people will scream numerology, but gosh, guys, either the universe is follows the laws of math and logic, or it doesn't. Like, and that will extrapolate into things that we don't understand. Whereas, like, how do you create a language, a written language? Why does that letter look like that and that letter look like that? There are reasons for that. If the universe has mathematical determinism as a modality of its functioning, which it does. But if you abandon that, then you're like, yeah, it's totally unrelated. It's totally unrelated. That's crazy. It's not building. Well, that's just a coincidence. But why? Oh, there's no reason to believe that there's a why. Oh, okay. So you've stopped thinking. That's what you just said. And if you say, well, so what? I don't have to explain the universe. I'm just a cosmologist. Okay, you've stopped doing your job. Please step aside. Like, please retire. And you're just ending up with nonsense every time because you're not constraining yourself at all. But there is a specific constraint that you must start building your worldview from. That is a first-person perspective, and it is asking of what would be the first questions that you would ask, and what is the truest thing that you know, which is like the first thing. Maya, lay down. Maya, sit. Lay down. Maya, come. Lay down. Lay down. Lay down. Lay down. Maya. Relax. It's fine. Malinois are a lot of work. But my dog, we during the pandemic last year, laid down. She hears our other dog outside, and she's like wondering what he's doing, so she's all curious. But this dog was with me everywhere, like she was like my shadow, and she was very well behaved, and she's still a good dog. She's just, during the pandemic, they closed all the dog parks, and not that the dog park is always the best place to bring your dog, but it's, you know, it was her outlet for socialization that was positive, and it worked. And then, we were basically stuck in this house with a roommate, and it just ended up being like restricting her to one spot. And that sounds kind of like related to this, where it would be like now she's constrained, but and she should have been better after that potentially, but that's not true actually, because the constraint is me. I'm the constraint for the dog. But if I'm not there because of the way our house was, we have multi-stories, and it wasn't the ideal situation. She had no constraints, and now she's not as good at navigating her environment. So she's now around a constant constraint, which is me. Okay, questions. After or before the lo-fi? YouTube is now technically anti-Semitic. I don't get it. Too funny. Somehow I don't see him being a or the creator of the universe. Oh, Sean Carroll? Yeah, no, he's not. But piece of him, but not God. He's so lost. He's so lost, and so is everyone else in this field almost, except maybe like few people. And it's because none of them have any constraints of themselves. It's funny because like people will say things to me like, well, we don't even know if consciousness is real, or we don't even know what consciousness is, or we don't even know if God exists. It's like, make an assumption and test it. Stop like making this. I hate that. It's like lazy. It's just scientific laziness. It's like, we don't even know. Well, isn't the goal to find out? Like, that's the goal, right? So, but the thing is when you make a positive assertion, you're like, well, consciousness is fundamental to existence. And God does exist. Oh, well, we don't even know. Well, so figure it out, You can't just be like, well, we don't even know. Okay, great. So figure it out. Like, you have to go somewhere from there, though. You have to, and you can't do that unless you make a positive assumption. You'd be like, the universe is fundamentally not sentient. Or, no, I don't even know, you can't do, this is the problem with like trying to disprove God, is you get to it's not falsifiable. And that's because it's true. It's like true everywhere too. It's like, it's not that, oh, it's not falsifiable, so like let's abandon it. It's like, no, it's not falsifiable because you can't do it. Like, it's so funny to me where people are like, well, science won't concern itself with the idea of God because it's just not falsifiable. Well, why isn't it falsifiable? Like, is there a reason why it's not falsifiable that might be scientifically relevant? Why is it that the logic breaks apart when you're trying to falsify God? Maybe because there's no logical way that God can't exist. Maybe that. But that's never an assumption that's actually taken seriously. It's just dismissed. But I would argue any day that it's because it's logically impossible to logically dismiss it away, or to prove it incorrect. I can't get over this Sean Carroll thing. I'm gonna have to include that in the next one. I'm gonna definitely like save that that part of the clip. It makes it so easy, and I don't like to like pick on people, but I will pick on their arguments. And this is an argument. I'm not gonna like go after Sean Carroll's character. I would imagine he's human. That's his character. Not bad, not good, but does good and bad things. Why do I need to explain the universe? Maybe that's what you said that you wanted to do. Maya, be quiet. It's okay. God is not a good theory is a terrible name for a lecture. It should be God is a good theory. You can't even say any positive assumption or assertion that's the opposite of that. Because you're like, you could be like, anti-theism is correct, but the thing is you're still saying anti. So if you can't do it by saying being positive something, being pro something, then it's probably because you're trying to do something impossible. Like disprove, that consciousness is fundamental to existence. It's like, well, I'm going to try and prove that sentience isn't the fundamental property of existence. What this forces you to do is dismiss your fundamental sense-making methods. And then we shouldn't take you seriously anyways, because you've dismissed your fundamental sense-making methodology and hierarchy and context. That's crazy, guys. It's crazy. We're so lost. And the more I dig into this stuff, the more I just realize it. And it's because nobody wants constraints. And I will say, I do think that the inability to emotionally address this issue properly is not so much. I think, and I'm going by my own experience as an so-called atheist, but I would call myself an anti-theist now, in the past, is that it's not just that you don't see any logic behind God. It's twofold, which is that you've been told that if God exists, then it contradicts things that do make sense, isolated, that you do understand, like, adaptation and things like that. And but also if you, it also, and this is the main thing that forbids you from being able to deal with it, a lot of people from being able to deal with it maturely, is that it puts moral constraints on us. And the thing is, though, is that imagine you put no moral constraints, and this is like the last thing that I'll talk about as far as constraints tonight, is that if you have no moral constraints, this is what happens. It's the same exact thing that I showed you earlier in all of these logical breakdowns, from physics to math to, I guess, I don't know, theology, is you get basically the breakdown of any sense, and you, including your ability to make sense. So if people say there is no morality that's objective, there's no moral constraints, what you believe is right, okay. The thing is, though, is that there's almost no one in the world that would make that argument, and also never try and do the right thing. And so it's a self-defeating narrative, just like, the idea that sentience isn't fundamental to a fundamental aspect of existence. If you're like, sentience isn't a fundamental aspect to existence, it's just a fundamental aspect of my sense-making structure. Okay? So the truest thing that you know is you're sentient and you're going to build things that you would assume are more true than you, more fundamental than you, to as far as aspects to the universe, by using a sense-making structure that can only start from that I am sentient. It doesn't work. It's self-defeating, and that's also true of any type of unconstrained moral statement. You have to place moral constraints on yourself, and morality is there for building. Okay, it's for meaning. And if meaning exists at all, then it means that people matter. Okay? Mayash. Because your interpretation of meaning, of something as meaningful, causes meaning, you could say, or observes meaning. And then also, you being meaningful or impactful also causes meaning. So no matter what, people matter to meaning, or sentience matters to meaning. And so if you abandon the idea that there is no constraints to meaning, to morality, you can't also simultaneously say anything like, well, you have to go and do what means the most to you in the world, or you have to go and interpret what means the most to you in the world. It's like, how do you maneuver your own personal world if you have no hierarchy of what matters the most? You can't say your family means anything. You can't say that you mean anything. You can't say that your dog means anything. And this is fundamentally antithetical to any view of the world that anyone has. There's not a single soul on earth that thinks this way. Even the people that reject any sort of moral objectivism, the reality is that they would still believe that their loved ones are more meaningful than, some frog they've never seen. And they can't actually make that argument if there isn't a constraint to morality of some type at all. It means that you are internally inconsistent with your external world. And if that's the case, that's fine if you want to argue, oh, okay, well, you know what, I'm just going to assume then, though, that I'm not consistent with my external world. So just because I believe that, just because I have feelings about, some people being more meaningful in my life, doesn't mean they're actually, that people matter at all. Okay, well, you're now out of the conversation then about meaning. You're just saying, well, who am I to, show why things matter or why there's reason to anything. Okay, well, you're now out of the conversation. That's fine if you want to say that, but first of all, it's against mathematical logic, and it also means that you're no longer a player in this space, because you're basically telling us, I make no sense, and I know it, which is a self-defeating statement in the first place. How do you know that you make no sense if you make no sense? You can't even do it. It's so self-defeating. There is an objective moral construct, and there are objective moral constraints. And if there isn't, then there's no meaning and no sense, and you can't even make enough sense to tell me that it doesn't make sense. Good luck. It's the same exact breakdown in logic that you get when you're trying to disprove God, or that sentience is a fundamental aspect of existence. You end up having to say, well, I make no sense, and I'm not consistent with the universe, and therefore I'm inconsistent with logic and and number at all. In every way. And math. Those same people will tell you that everything is mathematically deterministic, which is nonsense. If sentience isn't a fundamental aspect of it. It's so just self-defeating. It's unfalsifiable to say that there is no objective moral constraints. It is unfalsifiable to say that there is no God. It is unfalsifiable to say that sentience is not a fundamental aspect of existence. And it's unfalsifiable to say that there is more than one existence. And the reason why all of those things are the way they are is because sentience is a fundamental aspect of existence. It is existence. There is, by definition, only one existence. And if those two things are true, then there is a God. And that means that this was all created for a reason. Because why does anyone do anything? You could say for no reason, but that's not really true. It's just whether or not your instincts were motivated or whether or not it was a conscious action. But your instincts don't exist yet, other than fight the system. But even then, that would lead to meaning, objective morality, moral constraints, numerological constraints, mathematical constraints, logical constraints, and they're all freeing because you can't build without them. And, look at what happens to people who abandon any moral constraints. They don't build. They don't build anything at all. They seek hedonism and decay away. And they don't build families that go on through time. Or they don't help other families that go on through time. You just decay. So, constraints are freeing, and it's the only way. That's my spiel on that. I mean, you cannot abandon them. Hit the like button, subscribe, ask any final questions. I'm going to end this at 8:30, like I said, because I put a constraint on myself. And I think that it's important because it will free the audience to actually watch my content. Because if you just pump out 4-hour-long videos multiple times a week, how's that gonna be followable? You can't follow anything if there's no constraints on it. So I appreciate everyone in the chat today, everyone watching. Like always, follow me on Instagram. Go to theoryofeverone.com, or not theoryofeverone.com, sentientsingularity.com. Scroll to the bottom of the homepage. Maya. And this dog. Eventually, I think she's gonna get much better at just chilling out. And not even eventually. It'll probably take a week. She's very adaptable, but this is all new, and she's just in here like, what are we doing? Talking to like some no one. To her, at least, she doesn't know who I'm talking to. Probably look insane. But anyways, does that make sense to anyone? I hope so. It's hard when you're discussing something that is like unfalsifiable to like show why, or to show what that would mean, and like what's the point of that. And so it's tough. This is like, I recognize why it's tough and that it is tough. So I'm not like, unaware of the issues involved in discussing an unfalsifiable idea. It's not so simple as like, oh, let's arrange an experiment and a test and like, let's see. You are the test. You are the test and the results all at the same time, and the tester. And like that that leads to just certain constraints. And like you have to think about what those constraints are. They are profound and they will lead you to all new understanding. How's it going, Ethan? So as I said at the beginning of the stream, for those of you who are here, who may have just got here, may have been listening, may have, not have heard at the beginning, I am changing the time to 6:30. We'll still keep the same days, but we're going to change it to 6:30, and we're going to keep it only 2 hours or less. And we're ending before 8:30 if we start at 6:30, which is what we did today, because it's much more freeing of everyone. And I just realized I was like trapping everyone into either listening to my content or having a life, and like can't do that. So, gotta free people. Anyways, that's that. Like I said, I appreciate everyone here. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Hit the like button. Hit the bell notification icon. Follow me on Instagram. Sign up at sentientsingularity.com before they kick us off here. And that's a great idea. Awesome. I'm glad you think so. I haven't talked to you about it yet, but that's the gist of it. I just realized it was just like there were aspects of it that were not working with the audience, even though it didn't really impact me so much. Even though it did impact me, actually. I was sort of thinking the same thing. I needed to start going to bed earlier, and it made it hard to keep up. Yeah, I figured that was true of everybody who was not, on my time. And even if they were, it was ending at like 11 something. It's too much. I also haven't had time to write and much because of it, and work on my own things. I've been just like streaming, hanging out with my wife, hanging out with my wife. I need like also time to work on my own projects, which is this project. So, constraints will free you. But that's that, and I will see you guys tomorrow at 6:30. And yeah, peace.